Welcome to Real World Retirement. We're in episode 2 and, Real World Retirement, what are we doing? We're talking about real situations with real families in retirement and the things that you can do to educate yourself, but also make sure you're being proactive. I am super excited today. I have Adam Spears, who is, top advisor. This guy has spent an extensive part of his life actually in the real estate world and then transitioned to financial planning. So he has a phenomenal perspective of multiple industries that I'm going to really try to carve and dive into today. But Adam, do me a favor. Let these folks kind of know your story. What got you into financial planning and being an advisor?
Yeah, that's a great question. And first, just thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. A little bit about my story. My parents were divorced when I was very, very young. So with that, I saw two very different philosophies on money. Okay. There was 3 of us kids. My mom raised us most of the time. On one side of that coin, I saw my mom. She was a teacher, never made great sums of money, but she always stuck to a plan. Okay. Always had a plan. So much so that I would sit at the kitchen table and watch her balance her checkbook to the penny. And that meant a lot because there wasn't a lot of pennies to go around.
The good old days.
Correct.
Right?
There was not a lot of pennies to go around. So, but she had always stuck to a plan. And so because of that, she's been retired for 20 years. And, that affected me. Right. Affected me so much that I made a career out of it. But, then on the other side of that coin, I saw my dad, which, he became very successful in his 40s, but, didn't really have a great plan laid out. There was a certain point of his life where he was probably, as any entrepreneur, probably spending money as fast as he made it, right? And so never really had retirement in mind. And, because of that, don't get me wrong, my father still loves what he does, but I think there's a part of him that maybe still has to work. Right. Okay. And so, I saw both sides of that. And again, it really did fundamentally affect me in how could I set people on the right path, right? How could people, really understand, can I retire or what are some of the inhibitors from me retiring? And so, early on in my finance career, I kind of did that on the real estate and lending and really helping people whether it was buy that first home or kind of create that first step to generational wealth. Mm-hmm. But with that came, a very kind of in-depth understanding of debt. Yeah. And, good debt, bad debt. Yeah. And I bring that to, my financial advising practice because I do sit down with a lot of people that are wondering about the debt load they carry. Yeah. And so that's really what got me into it.
And that's a really interesting story. And that makes a lot of sense. So you have two polar opposites, right? You have your mom who's not making a ton of money, but is a very diligent planner, right? Correct. And very proactive about, what do I want my life to look like when I do pull that trigger? And then you hear your dad, who's maybe a larger earner and didn't do as much planning ahead of time. And so you got to see two very different perspectives, which is very unique.
Yeah, very much so. And again, I'm not saying that there was, one was ultimately better than the other, but it does give me a level of understanding because even inside of a household. Right. I think we see that, and you've probably seen that. Even inside of a household, there's typically a larger breadwinner. Absolutely. And then maybe someone that doesn't earn as much. And, how are you allocating those resources? And, you'd be shocked that sometimes it is the person that isn't earning as much that has saved more. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Right. The squirrel, right?
Correct.
For winter, so. Right? So on the debt piece, that's a great segue, I think, for us to jump into kind of some of the case studies that you had brought to the table today. Yeah. And just so everybody knows, again, today we're going to be talking about debt. And the name of the episode is going to be The Game of Debt. And again, it's phenomenal because Adam was giving me a little bit of a recap before we jumped in. And we were just talking about, how often people are asking, should I pay off my house? Yeah. How do I handle this debt? Right? Credit cards, etc.
Yeah, I get that question. And credit cards are one thing, right? And obviously, we're really coming out of a very high interest rate environment. Yeah. Right. Mortgage rates weren't great. Credit cards, interest rates were going up. You kind of felt like people were gouging it, and there was less access to credit. And we've kind of seen it as a nation, our debt grow, right? The individual household debt really grow. And so I have noticed in my practice and meeting with people that it can be a very large inhibitor towards retirement, right? Outside of credit card debt and mortgage debt, there's parents that did parental plus loans and help put their kids through college, and now they're on the hook for it. Their kids are done, and there's a couple cases that come to mind, but more importantly, I want to stick on the housing one.
Right.
Because that's one of those things where the thought process I wouldn't say is wrong, right? Like not carrying debt into retirement. I don't think the thought process is wrong. I think it's maybe misguided.
Okay.
Right. So, again, we're coming out of a high interest rate environment, but we were right before that in a very, very low interest rate retirement. And if you were one of those people that took advantage of that, right, refinanced your home, maybe you're at, sub 3% or 3.25, right?
Right.
And so, I sit down with couples and they're like, yeah, we've been putting an extra $500 a month towards our mortgage. And as I spoke to you about it earlier, Al, sometimes it's just a simple math equation.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. If this was the 80s, first off, crazy times. Yeah. But if this was the 80s and, you had purchased your first home and your interest rate was 11, 12, 17%.
Hey, I had somebody tell me 19.4 the other
Exactly.
day.
Right. Like that is an absurd amount. And, you feel like you're just only putting money towards interest. Right.
Right.
But you and I know, because we talked about, like, we refinanced during that time and, what our interest rates were. And again, talking to couples about that, it's, listen, if you're at 3%, right, and you're putting an extra $500 a month towards your mortgage, I simply ask this question, right? Do you think that if you were to put that money in the market or put it even into, a CD or anything, right, do you think you could potentially make more than 3%, right? And that's what I say is at some point, it can be a simple math equation, right?
Absolutely.
And the thing about your home is when I talk to people about debt, again, it's not for everybody, but what I'll say is I'm okay with carrying debt into retirement on an appreciating asset. A home, a second home, that's an appreciating asset, right? You're gaining equity no matter what. Right. And I tell them, I'm like, listen, at a 3% interest rate, I would not be in a rush to give the bank back their principal. Right. People say at interest rates that low, it's almost free money. Now I know it's not, but again, we're kind of getting into taglines. So that's what I would say is, let's assess each case by case, right? Now, if you're carrying $50,000 in credit card debt and, your interest rate is 24, 25%, that's the debt I do not want to take into retirement, right?
That bad debt,
right? Yeah. And, that's the stuff that, you could pay $500 a month towards that and you're not even cutting into the principal, right? You know what I mean? Like those are the inhibitors. Those are the different types of debt. Yeah. So, specifically around the house. And I don't know if you've had, clients that have come into you and asked that also, and they say, listen, I just want to lower what my monthly outflow is.
Right. And again, it's like most of the time when I see that, it's people have a goal. Right. Well, I had a goal to have my house paid off by the time I retired. And it actually has nothing to do with math or the quote unquote financial planning.
No.
But it's a personal thing, right?
Correct.
I know you had a couple specific cases and kind of stories.
Yep.
Do you maybe want to dive into one of those as a good segue, and then we can kind of keep that moving on that one?
Yeah. So specifically, we'll just call them, John and Jane Smith, right?
Okay.
Specifically, they had, kind of to go back to my dad.
Yes.
Right. Living outside of their means. Right. And, during your accumulation phase, when you're earning money and maybe putting money away, maybe not, that I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it seems a little bit easier when there's still checks coming in.
Right.
And people have gotten themselves into trouble that
Absolutely.
way. But kind of the extensive planning that I put together when we went through their income plan and I factored in their debt load And, I looked at all their statements. I looked at the outflow of cash that just went to debt. And, luckily, this gentleman had put together a spreadsheet over the last year about what he was paying and what he was paying towards and everything else. And again, one of the words I used was misguided, right? He wasn't tackling the highest interest rate debt first. He was just kind of spreading everything out thin.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
Yes.
I sat down with him and I just said, hey, here's, if we're going to create a path forward, right? If we're going to, get you out of this situation so that you can retire in the next 7 years, whatever it was, let's put together this 5-year plan and let's start tackling this bad debt. Let's start tackling highest interest rates first and, really getting that down. And, again, the other thing that we potentially looked at, and don't get me wrong, this is not for everybody.
Right.
Is, the equity that you might have in your home. Because
Right.
I'm going to go back to that thing of, listen, debt on an appreciating asset, I do not have a problem with as an advisor. Now, again, interest rates are high, and I'm not telling everybody to run out and get a home
Right.
equity line,
Right.
right? It's
Talk
not
to a
it's not for everyone.
professional,
Talk to a
right.
professional.
Yeah.
But, again, going back to that simple math equation, right? If you have the equity in your home and, you could get a home equity line for, the interest rate is far less than the high interest rate debt that you're paying down. Sometimes that does make sense. And
Yeah.
it can speed that process up. And again, it's tying debt to one, secured debt. It's based on a hard asset and an asset that's appreciating, right?
Yes.
You're not tying it to, a car that's a depreciating asset, right? And credit card debt is unsecured. There's nothing backing it, correct? And so, we really laid out this kind of multi-tiered 3 to 5 year plan to put them in a place that one, after the first 2 years, they could start contributing to retirement again. That was the big one,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So this outlay of cash was not just going towards debt. It was getting the debt down to a point where now we can start contributing again. So now this put us on our 7-year retirement timetable.
Got it.
Okay.
So this is interesting though, Adam, because what you're talking about is, a lot of the time it's like there's not a plan in place on debt.
Rarely.
Because it's not like anybody likes talking about debt, right? It's not a fun, the stock market, the buys, there's all the fancy and sexy fun conversations in financial planning, and debt's not one of them. And so you're saying, hey, listen, and again, you're doing a math equation.
Yeah.
Hey, this is what we're going to pay for this amount of time towards this debt. We're going to be here in 1 year, here in 2 years. And basically you're just setting it up to where, hey, over this amount of time, we're not only going to clear the debt, we're going to start saving and then X, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, you and I, you say this all the time, I'm going to let the math and data tell me, let it tell us what to do.
Right.
Right. And as advisors, our, at the core, our job is to present the math and the data and say, here's what we should do. Now, at the end of the day, it's your money, right? But here's what we should do, and here's what the math, and here's what the data is telling us, and here's how this not only affects this year of paying down debt or the next year. Here's how this affects the next 5, 10, 15, 25 years of your retirement.
And that's so powerful to have those visual aids. And again, lean into the math, science, economics, and data to tell you this story, or at least give you the options to then educate the family. And what I would also is just, to encourage families out there who might be listening, or an individual who has problems with debt, right? And you don't know how to tackle that. That is exactly what we're here for. Drop a comment in here. Make sure you're following us on social media at Foguth Financial. And we're going to do our best to educate you. But this is a community. And I know how important it is to you. I mean, going back to your parents, going back to my grandparents, right? Which is what got me in the business. Is we are here as a resource. So do not hesitate. Like our pages, follow us. We're always going to be giving you great information. But on top of that, if you are somebody who needs some help and you need a debt plan, not fun, but the debt plan is what leads to that retirement, that savings, that income plan. If you're somebody out there and you're trying to figure out, man, should I pay off my house or not? Again, please reach out to us, send us a message, comment. That's what we're here for, is to help educate. and we're going to put you in touch with a great professional, just like Adam here, who's going to be able to do this, because experience matters, right?
Yeah.
You do something 100 times, 1,000 times, and the numbers will reveal themselves, right?
Yeah, and the kind of the last piece I'll add to this, right? Kind of the last piece about the debt thing is even I could put together the perfect plan, right? Let's say I hit the nail on the head. I put together the perfect plan to get you out of debt and start to contribute and everything else. If we're not changing the habits that got you into this, and listen, I'm no psychologist. Just let me tell you that.
Right.
But identifying those, right? Identifying those triggers or identifying those habits that got you into this situation. Now, some of them might not be habits. Some of them could have been life and it's unavoidable, right? But in most of these cases, I have found that it's these habits that put us into this situation. Identifying those and, changing habits is one of the hardest things to do in life, right?
Amen.
But, really focusing on that, because again, if I put together this perfect plan, they're not all going to be perfect, but let's say it was, and, we stuck to our table perfectly. The last thing I want to do is have to do it again for you in 5 years, right? And I can't talk about the planning side without talking about the habitual or mental side of kind of what got us.
Absolutely. The root of the cause, if you will.
100%.
And so let me ask you another question, because again, I love always talking about the mortgage stuff and the debt stuff, just because I know you've helped out so many different families in that space. When it comes to paying off, because like I'll give you a scenario and then do me a favor and just kind of give me your intake from knowing limited information. Yeah. So I had a client the other day that I was talking to. They have a mortgage. They owed about $95,000, right?
Okay.
They're retiring. I think they had somewhere in the neighborhood of $800,000-900,000 in the 401k.
Okay.
And as well as I, you sit down with somebody and they have a plan. Like, this is what I plan to do. Yeah. And then it's almost like we're here to verify, A, is that a good idea? B, is there other options, right? Sure. Again, it was right around $95,000 in debt. Their mortgage was at about 4.1. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the first thing they want to do is, hey, Alex, we want to get rid of our mortgage and pay it off. Didn't have any other debt. So that, is a good thing. Yeah. How do you go into that conversation to figure out, should we or should we not do it? Yeah. Is it always going back to what that interest rate is? Is it always going up to the opportunity cost of what we can get? Kind of give me just like what you'd be asking or thinking about when somebody gives you, that type of scenario. Yeah.
And that's a great question, because there is a lot more tied into it than just interest rate versus rate of return.
Yes.
Right. Because everybody's situation is unique. So with that, a big part of our planning is, planning for your income or your income equation. Right, like I like to refer to, is how are we making up your income, not just do I have enough for the next.
Yeah. And what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
So what I mean by your income equation is, during your working years, your income is probably coming in one way. Most people it's W-2, but maybe you're a business owner. I won't get into that. I don't want to bore anybody, but you have your one source, right?
Yes.
And it's always going to be kind of taxed the same way. Whereas, in retirement, if you and I, in doing our due diligence and planning, and they say, hey, I want to live on this amount. And we have that, yearly or monthly, whatever it is. The luxury you have in retirement is you get to choose the sources, right? If your buckets are adequately funded, you get to choose, all right, how do I get to this number? Now there's going to be some constants, right? Maybe it's Social Security, maybe it's a pension, da-da-da-da-da. But how we get the rest, the balance, right? We get to choose.
Yeah.
So back to that is, it's not as simple as rate of return versus interest rate, right? It's, all right, well, what do you want your monthly income goal to be, right? And part of that is my influence. Part of that is what their goal is. And then we look at that and then we say, all right, well, do you have the assets to reach that goal? And of that goal, how much of that is going towards debt or mortgage debt, right? And so if you have the capacity or limited assets, or you have this monthly number in mind and you don't want it to factor in to your mortgage debt or how many years you might have left,
right?
Then again, it's not that it's an unanswerable question, but I have to bring in all of that data, right? Because so to your point, it's kind of limited, but there's a higher level of planning. And, us sitting down and really getting the ins and outs of kind of, as well as I do, we always plan comprehensively, right? So I have to factor in all of your assets and, how are we going to allocate these assets in retirement? Is it going towards mortgage debt or other debt, or do you not want, again, if you could have the lowest interest rate in the world, right? But there's only, $20,000 left on your mortgage, right? Well, okay, I get it. Maybe don't race to pay that off. But then there's other people where, their interest rate is extremely high. And I'm like, it might make sense. We're nearing to retirement. Let's look at an amortization schedule, right? How many payments you have left. If we were to make extra payments, when does this debt fall off? And then let's calculate that and bring that, that expense out of your income plan, right? And it's getting kind of high level here, but out of your income plan to say, oh, now I have this much in disposable income. I can actually slow down my draw on my assets. So I'm not sure if that answered your question.
It did. And you brought one thing up, though, that I want to just dig into a little bit deeper. Because then, there's always those folks out there like, all right, fine, I'm not going to pay it off, right? How do I just speed it up? And now one of the things that like I do personally is I'll just usually like, okay, if you took my monthly mortgage, right, call it $2,300.
Yeah.
I will make like 2 or 3 extra $2,300 payments per year.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And I've heard people that say, hey, if you do an extra, 2 payments a year, it speeds it up by X.
Yep.
I've heard other people talk about, hey, I split my mortgage payment up into 2 payments a month, right? So the interest doesn't carry. What's your take on some of these kind of like speed up the process strategies?
Yeah, and they can. And again, it always kind of ties back into, was there a bonus and should that bonus go to this, or, how are we speeding it up? And I would always say, one, check with your servicer. And I know mortgage servicers change all the time, but there's a lot of great resources kind of online when it comes to just amortization calculators or mortgage calculators.
Right.
And you can run that math and say, all right, if I made 2 extra payments or if I made 3 extra payments, right? I'm on I've got 15 years left of a 30-year mortgage, right? It's kind of like us looking at, I can't do the math in my head. It's the same thing as like, compounding interest, right? It gets a little dicey after a while, after that first 2 years. But, no, but to your point, yes. And I've run those scenarios for people saying, hey, you know what, your retirement timeline is 10 years from now, right? To kind of go back to it. And your goal, right? The goal you had was, I don't want to carry any debt into retirement. Okay. Well, now we get into, let's see what it would take. How many extra payments would it take? Yeah. And then we have that number, right? Then it's easy to kind of go back and say, all right, would that number, right, the extra payments be better allocated towards your home or towards your retirement? And again, that's what brings me back to,
got it.
Well, how is the rest of your retirement funded, right? Are we underfunded in certain areas? Would it make sense to put this more towards, an after tax or a non-qualified or, even towards your 401k? Are you reaching your match, right? So I wish it was, if it was as easy as a yes or no answer, right? Then I probably wouldn't have a job. No, just kidding. But no, in reality, right? It is, everybody's situation is unique, because I could have the exact same people. They have the exact same retirement assets. Their mortgage rate is exactly the same. And the answer could be different for both of them.
Yeah, that's a very, it's a very interesting world that we work in. And so basically what you're saying is, with any type of decision around debt, you can't just take it and put it in an island, right? You can't just silo that decision.
No.
You have to consider all your aspects of, okay, what's my, for example, what's my Social Security? What's my pension? What's my inflation rate? What's my COLA? Am I at RMD age? Am I not? What are my total assets? Are they non-qualified? Are they IRA? Is it Roth?
Yeah.
Oh, what's my interest rate average over the last 10 years on investments, right? Like, that is what we're talking about. Like, when you say comprehensive, you're talking about factoring in every piece. Hey, how old are you?
And
what's your medical age? You know what I mean? Like
the list keeps going. And while you were saying all those things, another thing popped in my head is one of the, are you married or or are you with a partner? Is someone going to work longer than somebody else? Is it okay because there's going to be more money coming? Like so many things go into the decision.
Right. Yes.
And while on surface, yes, can it be sometimes as simple as a math equation? Sure. But the equation can have a lot of factors.
Yeah. And again, just kind of going back to that, I encouraging, if you're listening and again, your mind's kind of running with questions, again, drop a comment and send us a message. Adam is one of the most passionate guys and financial professionals that I've worked with pertaining to like really wanting to give the right answer and not just giving the answer to give it. And that's the type of folks that I always want to encourage families to work with is like, hey, don't just take a surface level answer, right? There's more to the conversation. And there's sometimes you're going to have tough conversations that people don't want to have, right?
Yeah. And the debt one is it's never an easy conversation.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And that's why, we kind of joke around and call it the game of debt because it's the game of debt.
Yeah.
Is it good debt? Is it bad debt? Is it debt that we can even tackle right now? Or is it going to take us 7 years?
Yeah.
And that's not something fun to hear. Hey, this is going to take you 7 years to do this.
No,
right?
And those are the difficult conversations. You're right. But yeah, to that point, there's a lot of moving pieces, and just like any, board game or anything else, that's
that.
Yeah.
Anything else you would want to kind of leave the families who are listening in with pertaining to, maybe some just unique rules or ideas around debt and or like the mortgage space? Because again, I know, dealing with the lending and the mortgage and all that stuff. Like, is there any, kind of little tips you would throw out there maybe?
The main thing is just kind of evaluating. It's interesting with what the Fed's doing, and I know that they've kind of cut rates twice now. And a large portion that I get around that is, if we have debt, should we wait? Do we know if the Fed is going to continue to cut rates? Where are home equity, lines of credit at? If that's going to be factoring into your kind of debt relief plan. And what I would say is, one, if you need resources, I have them. Obviously, coming from that industry, I have them. And just do your research, right? Again, it's okay to kind of get those figures of, what would the interest rate be? What would that be? And then bring it back to me.
Yeah.
Right. Because again, what is the main thing that we do? It's not just about this year or next year. It's, I want you to have the data backing and showing how does this affect the next 5, 10, 15, 20, hopefully 35 years of your life. Right. And that's the big one is, if you need resources, I can help. Or if you're just saying, I don't know if this is the right choice. Well, let's put some data or some math behind it.
Yeah. And I think to that encouragement piece of, hey, go, unfortunately, sometimes somebody will bring you a question. You're like, hey, listen, I got homework for you before I can give you the answer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, I need you to go get the exact interest rate on what your HELOC would be and how much will they approve you for?
Yep.
Hey, well then what's the, and so there's unfortunately some back and forth, but to your point, don't take that surface level answer.
Yeah.
Right. Because again, good, bad, and different. There's good and bad in every industry.
Yep.
You don't want people who are going to say, oh yeah, this is the answer. And just to get you out of their hair and quote unquote, be lazy about it. Right. You're going to do your due diligence and you have a process. Because I know everything we do is very process oriented, right? Yeah. And to your point, sometimes that's going to involve doing some homework and getting a little bit more information.
Yeah, and I guess the one main thing that I would really like people to take from this is I'm not here advocating to load your house up with debt.
Yeah,
right. It's not where I'm going with this, and because I know those are the questions I'm going to get, and I'm not advocating for that. I really just want to shed light on kind of the overall debt. Debt and retirement, and just it's not an easy conversation, but if we start right, and you and I know this, and I say this is one of my corniest lines ever, but I love it, right? The best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago, right? The second best time is today, and I really take that attitude when it comes to it's not difficult, but let's bring all the debt or all the negative things that would impact your retirement to light so that we can tackle them.
Yeah, I love that. And I appreciate it. And again, I can't encourage anybody who's listening out there. If this is you, if you have questions around this, that's what we're here to do. Talking to us, getting some of these solutions figured out. There's not a cost to that. Like, we just do this because we want to be a good part of a community. And, again, we got great families we serve. We have great clients we serve. But at the heart of it, it's about education. And so, Adam, thank you again. Thank you so much for coming on, sharing some of your wisdom.
Happy to.
And that's all good too. Somebody reaches out, you're more than happy to help. Fair?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I'm here for.
Awesome. Well, thank you. That's going to be wrapping up our second episode here of Real World Retirement, the game of debt. We're hoping you enjoy it. Again, do not hesitate to engage with us. Follow us on social media, comments. Again, anything you need out there, we are here to support you. And again, if you're somebody who's struggling with debt and or just how to deal with some of that stuff in retirement, do I pay off my house? Do I not? And or anything really mortgage or lending related pertaining to the financial planning piece, we're here to support you. Thanks for tuning in and listening. We'll see you next time.